Hello and welcome to Kalam Digest, Kalam Podcast's weekly news update. Today's Tuesday, the 18th of February. It'll be the 19th by the time our listeners hear this. I'd like to welcome to the show my eminent and wonderful colleagues, Sam Kol Samra and Noura Din Faris. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi, Edgar. Welcome to the
Thank
show.
you. Hi, Edgar.
It's cold in Sweden, and it's not as
Heard.
in Rome.
Din Telg.
No, it's not cold. We have a very sunny day, actually. I'm enjoying it a lot, especially here in the airport.
This is a very improper imbalance in this podcast right now. That the fact that you're in Rome while we're stuck.
I mean, you're welcome whenever you feel like it, you know?
Thank you.
You can take your little car.
All right. Today's headlines: Gaza, the riviera of the Middle East, and Benjamin Netanyahu hailing the displacement of 2 million Palestinians as the only plan, quote unquote. Syria and Lebanon are both involved in complicated balancing acts, and they're on the brink of renewed wars. How will they fare? Find out later in the show. But first to the West Bank, where Israel's month-long and wide-scale military operation is intensifying. The Israeli military launched a wide-scale operation last month. Some would call it a war against militants, what they would see as terrorists, in several cities in the West Bank. Now, roughly 40,000 Palestinians have fled their homes. This is according to the New York Times. And that's the highest since Israel occupied the territory nearly 6 decades ago in 1967. So the highest number of displaced Palestinians on the West Bank since 1967, when there was an all-out regional war. The places that have been targeted in the West Bank are Jenin, and these are the refugee camps in Jenin, although the Jenin refugee camp a couple weeks ago, has been completely emptied. But there are also refugee camps near Tul Karim and Farah and Tulbas governorate. We've seen over the past few weeks kind of horrifying images of even Israeli military personnel targeting school children. I don't think I have to repeat these images for you. We might show you guys in the final edit what I'm talking about. But really horrific scenes, and I think this generally kind of comes as public opinion is shifting. I've even seen, some of these like centrist, both Palestinian but mostly Israeli commentators who at the beginning of the war after 7th of October were like, well, look, guys, we have to defeat the terrorists and the Israeli military is doing what they can. I've seen these kind of commentators and pundits. They're not many, but some of them I've seen have just completely changed their tone and said like, actually, guys, I was wrong. I can't believe I said that. We have been committing war crimes all along. So I think that this West Bank attack comes as sort of the world opinion is turning on this, but it might be turning too late because the situation is escalating on the West Bank. Palestinians largely defenseless in this mass deportation, I would say, or like mass eviction of Palestinians. I can quote here from the New York Times article. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said that water and sanitation systems had been destroyed in 4 dense urban neighborhoods known as refugee camps because they housed people displaced in 1948 and their descendants. It added that some water infrastructure had been contaminated with sewage. Quote, "We've reached a point where the refugee camps are out of order," said Hakim Abu Safia, who oversees emergency services in Tul Karam camp. "They are uninhabitable. Even if the army pulls out, we're not sure what will be left to repair." End quote. Now, this feels obviously reminiscent of what Israel has been doing in Gaza for the past year and a half almost now. And people that care about, the Palestinians, the Palestinian cause, and many parts of the world that previously didn't give a shit, I would say, are genuinely concerned because this seems like it's the Trump quid pro quo. This is what Trump gave Netanyahu and his fascist colleagues in exchange for a temporary ceasefire. And just in a minute, Noura, you're going to be telling us about how that's faring. But I think we're seeing this is the green light that Trump has given Netanyahu and his criminal military to do on the West Bank. The question is, will it persist? What are the consequences? It's until now unknown. Jordan has leaked documents to the press previously saying that if Israel forcibly displaces Palestinians into Jordanian territory, it will declare war on Israel. I think that those are the harshest words we've heard from Jordan, even though they're not, official statements. They're leaked statements to the press. I do think that this is extremely volatile, and we have an administration in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. it never acts as a genuine negotiating partner or a sort of mediator. It always acts as Israel's lawyer, but now we're seeing it act, as Israel itself, or even worse, as one and the same. So shit is not very good, essentially. Do you guys have a comment on the West Bank?
I mean, I think you're right. It's of course it's very troubling scenes, but it's also, as you mentioned, it's what we've been expecting for a while, that Trump would give the Israelis in exchange for a peace plan, or at least a ceasefire plan for Gaza. What is really troubling here is, of course, that they have much more of a vested interest in actually reoccupying the West Bank or taking over. They are already, of course, since forever, building settlements and taking over huge parts of the West Bank. But Gaza is more like a place to be pacified, quote unquote. Even though, of course, Trump has this plan for like a Gaza beach resort thing to serious Israeli politicians and army leadership, and they're not really that interested in Gaza. They would prefer to just keep it sealed off. While the West Bank is the place that they really want. I mean, they have this whole thing with the Judea and Samaria being part of, integral parts of Israel, and it's not so much just a question of will they eventually displace all Palestinians into Jordan? Of course they would like that, but just for every week or every month that they can keep going like this, they displace more and more Palestinians within the West Bank. They narrow it down, the areas which are actually inhabited by Palestinians, and they keep building settlements, and basically the size of the Bantustan is shrinking. It's not this definitive either or situation, but also it's every week of this is a worsening situation for Palestinians, not just in the short term, but in terms of control over Palestine.
Yeah, I remember a trip I made to Jerusalem in 2022. I interviewed the then deputy mayor of Jerusalem, one Aryeh King, who is a close ally to Itamar Ben-Gvir. And this Aryeh King, a really, really crazy settler, his idea was essentially that we encourage Palestinians to move to Jordan as much as we can. Not by force. They never say this. They always say not by force. We just strongly encourage them. We can even offer them money. And those who choose to stay, they should be relocated into the major Palestinian urban centers like Ramallah, like Bethlehem, for now. But they should be concentrated there, and they should be moved out of the countryside, because the countryside belongs to the Israelis. So that's what they say openly, and that's what they said openly in 2022. So today,
even that is a straightforward genocidal plan, of course. I mean, it means you put Palestinians into smaller and smaller concentration camps, basically, and then eventually you will either kill them or deport them. So I mean, even what they're saying publicly is not just illegal. It's far beyond anything that's acceptable by any international law.
Yeah. So the situation is volatile, to say the least, and the 40,000 Palestinians who've lost their homes, many of them don't have. I mean, who have fled, many of them, or have been. Let's be real, have been forcibly displaced by Israel. the Israeli military. Many of them do not have homes to return to because they've been demolished. Entire neighborhoods are being demolished in and around these refugee camps. And some people will not have, basic infrastructure to return to, not just their homes, but like the quote I read said, basic infrastructure and water infrastructure is being contaminated with sewage and it's just being destroyed. So, um, it's quite undescribable, the kind of horror that people are going through.
Honestly, I think what strikes me the most is the lack of action from the international community. And especially this week, we've been seeing a lot of talk about Russia, Ukraine. And of course, you cannot compare the wars because the history is different and it's complicated and all of those things. But you have world leaders flying in last minute to Paris to discuss how to get some type of peace between Russia, Ukraine, and the lack of action when it comes to the Palestinians and the way that we are just observing everything that is happening and resolution after resolution also in the UN. It's just, it's constantly being discussed, but no one is there isn't any actual measurements or any action taken against this these things that are happening to the Palestinians. Sometimes I can just look at it from this it's such an unfair way of behaving, like from the international community. It's almost like it's impossible to kind of fathom how unfair it is.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's also, I mean, it's central, but I think we're talking a lot about how Russia is tied up in Ukraine and that affects what's going on in Syria, for example. One thing we haven't touched upon so much is, I mean, for mostly, I think, for the reason that the U.S. for a long time until Trump took over seemed to be the losing or the weakest side, diplomatically speaking, in this whole situation since 7th of October. But the fact that Europe is so deeply, tied up in the question of Ukraine, especially when the U.S. is weirdly, but starting to behave a bit towards Europe as it's been behaving towards the rest of the world for the last 70 years. Suddenly, Europe has to scramble, and have these meetings and like figure out what are they supposed to do. Before that, when there was like a strong, NATO unity, France and Germany and even the UK would be able to somehow somewhat hold the US back or hold them accountable or make them hold Israel accountable to a certain degree. But it's like Europe doesn't give a shit about the Middle East. Not to say that France is a great country when it comes to imperialism, but compared to Trump, it's obviously Macron would have been preferable, but it seems they're just basically just dropping that totally. And that just means there's no one to force anyone to do anything.
Yeah.
At the moment.
And this is still just 1 month in of Donald Trump's presidency. It's just in the beginning. It's just starting.
Yeah. Moving on to our second story today, Noor ad-Din Faris, would you please update us on the Gaza Riviera, on Trump's and on how things are doing in the Gaza Strip?
Well, in Gaza, there were reports of over 2/3 of all the housing and buildings have been destroyed during this the war that we have been witnessing for over a year and a half. Over 2 million people are looking for housing now that they have been allowed to return up north. And I have been in touch with Tala Emad, the friend of the podcast. Last time we heard from her, she was in Al Mawasi, and the ceasefire agreement had just kicked in. It was the morning of the ceasefire when she gave us an update. It has taken her some time to return home to Gaza City due to it being so extremely difficult to move from the south. The roads aren't really made for movement. The infrastructure is completely ruined, and it is very difficult to find housing. This is her own report, and this is what she says.
So this is the first voice note I'm recording in Gaza City, my original homeland. I've been here for 4 days, and the journey was extremely hard and difficult, exhausting and tiring. It held mixed feelings. I can't say that I wasn't afraid. No, I was very scared to see my home destroyed, to see my favorite places erased. When I reached Gaza, I wasn't able to recognize the places around me because I reached at 11 p.m. There's no electricity, and so there's no lights, and I didn't recognize everything. But the next day I insisted on going out and having a tour in my land. It was very heartbreaking. You can see exhaustion in the faces of people here, and literally people took down their tents from the south and put it up in the north because the apartments left are very few, and so the rents are extremely expensive, and most of the people now can't afford it. Although there are no bombs right now, planes and drones are over us every minute. It's a way of torturing us, another way of torturing Palestinians. So there's no peace, or let me say there's no full peace. And what I want to say is that people are tired. After a year and a half of war, the world expects from them to be able to live the hardest conditions ever. They're tired to smile. But still, we insist on living. We insist on living in our land. We insist on having, let me say, the minimum peace we can have.
Tala says that people are exhausted, and but still, like in her voice notes, she lets us know that there is still quite a lot of resilience and determination to rebuild. And this week is supposed to be the beginning of the negotiations of the second phase of the ceasefire deal, which would include releasing the remaining hostages held by Hamas in exchange for a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gazan soil. But this is all while Trump and Netanyahu keep pushing for a riviera of the Middle East and talking over and over again about basically displacing over 2 million Palestinians to Egypt and Jordan. And Benjamin Netanyahu is calling it over and over again for the OND plan, which is quite scary because Egypt and the World Bank are reportedly trying to make up their own plan for how to govern Gaza beyond the displacement plan. But the likelihood of Israel accepting such a proposal seems extremely low, and especially considering the fact that they keep on repeating that Trump's plan is the only plan, quote unquote.
Yeah, that is terrifying. But I just don't see how it's gonna work. You know, like how is the U.S. because Trump doesn't want to put U.S. troops on the ground
Mm.
and risk their lives. Obviously, Hamas is gonna fight that, and U.S. troops will die if he does that. I just
Mm.
don't see him doing that. You know, I like what kind of watered down version of this could we see? It seems like almost like he's talking a lot of shit, and he's gonna let Israel do most of it, of the work, of the continued like displacement. But it seems like toothless. Like remember with the fucking stupid Biden raft or whatever, the pier
Right.
Yeah, the pier. Oh god,
oh,
what about the pier?
blew away, like a wave
Oh, it's
came,
embarrassing.
blew it away.
yeah.
It seems like something like that. It's not gonna, the big like Riviera. They're not gonna turn it into Dubai. I don't see how this is gonna happen.
No. And I forgot about the pier. It's like ended up being like nothing happened except for like 2 American contractors died or something
Yeah.
in an accident.
Road deliveries.
He just kind of broke down, and then they just left the trash around and went back home. Yeah, I think you're totally right, Edgar. I mean, we talked about this before. There are aspects of this, as we just talked about with the West Bank, where Israel is achieving things every single day. In Gaza, of course, they're also achieving something to the extent that they are, they get their hostages back, etc. But this is just, it's not like half of it's going to happen. They're not going to make half of Gaza into the riviera of the Middle East. They're gonna make nothing of it into the riviera of the Middle East. I can't see that happening under any circumstances, and not because they wouldn't want to kill everyone. Of course, I mean, they have no issue with genocide. It's just like they're not gonna be able to do that without putting, as you said, forces. I mean, Israeli American troops on the ground, which Trump will most definitely not do. We should always be cautious about making any definitive statements about the US, especially about this guy. But I think if it's something we can be certain of, it is the US is not going to get involved on the ground with forces. That is his major, the major plank of the central plank of his whole foreign policy. Is the US is getting out of things, not moving in. And of course, he can support Israel going ahead with this, but Israel will also not be able to do that. I mean, we've seen that they've been trying for years now, and for a year and a half, and they're just not winning this war in terms of, actually getting rid of Hamas, actually taking control, and imagine if Israel was at the same time as this war was ongoing, they were trying to rebuild settlements. Even that would be, chaotic to say the least. And also Israel. I mean, we're right at this moment. We're so much stuck in this image that Israel has been successful in this whole endeavor. I mean, that is mostly because Syria fell. Assad fell, which weakened Hezbollah, which made, the ceasefire in Lebanon after the fact into a success for Israel. It was a failure when they signed the ceasefire.
Yeah.
And, that is, of course, I mean, as much as we're happy that Assad fell, that is a great thing for Syria and for Syrians. For Israel, it's also a great thing. I mean, it's a great thing because it weakens Hezbollah, not because Syria as such has been a threat to Israel since, the last 50 years. But apart from that, they failed miserably at everything except for killing people. And they will keep doing that. They will not be able to actually, carry out this war in a successful way, which is what building, a riviera in Gaza would necessitate. It would necessitate actually winning the war. And they're not. And Egypt is not going to take, 2.5 million Palestinians, of course. I mean, that is...
To be honest, though, don't you think that there is also like some type of signal in saying that they want to redo Gaza into a riviera? That is like a shift in boundaries and what you can and cannot say, because this is the first time that we've heard them say something like this, and it's actually becoming a statement that keeps on coming back in different ways. I don't think that is nothing, or that it will. That it won't have consequences for the people in Gaza. Like I think that the reason why they are saying it is probably because they're aiming for something like slightly smaller than actual Riviera, but they are aiming at something that is completely new that we haven't seen before. And whether, like, I can sometimes look at the actions that, if we just look at how the Arab world has behaved around this conflict, and even though they have been very loud with condemnations, they haven't actually done so much. The question is this where the breaking point is, and that our countries would actually start to get involved in the conflict? I don't really know, and I think that the US are kind of sure that they won't either.
I think the only breaking point for the Arab states would be if Palestinians are forcibly displaced outside of Palestinian territory. That's the breaking point.
And not for the sake of Palestinians, because that is unacceptable to Arab states. To be frank,
It isn't depressing it, it's for security reasons. But I think that you're absolutely right, Noura. Like, semantically, this is a big shift, and it's the nail. Well, it signals it is actually a big thing because no matter how much they actually meant it or how much they meant to implement it, the Biden administration and the Democrats and pretty much every administration before Trump in the US has at least paid lip service to the notion of a two-state solution.
Exactly.
Everyone, absolutely. Two-state solution, a state for the Palestinians and a state for the Israelis, with security guarantees for the Israelis, blah, blah, blah. Trump has completely abandoned that,
Yeah.
He doesn't believe in a two-state solution at all. And
Yeah.
he doesn't even have to say it. Just his appointments say it loud and clear. Marco Rubio as State Secretary of State, he doesn't believe in a two-state solution. He doesn't believe Palestinians exist. Mike Huckabee, for ambassador to Israel, he literally says Judea and Samaria and talks in those terms. He's a Christian evangelical Zionist. Steve Witkoff, he's like more of a secular Jew. He's the one who said to Netanyahu, "I don't give a fuck if it's Shabbat or not."
EP to sign this ceasefire deal or
Yeah.
whatever. That's what.
Especially he definitely doesn't believe in fucking Palestinians. And the ambassador to Israel, whose name escapes me, obviously is a hardcore settler, and he also does not believe in Palestinian identity or and definitely not a Palestinian state. So you're right. Of course, it's a huge shift. I don't think that they're going to build a riviera in Gaza. It's probably going to turn into more of a hellhole. And I definitely don't think that they're going to be able to displace those 2 million people. But I mean, it's going to take the next administration, if that's not also Trump or a Trumpian person, it's going to take a lot of
For
effort.
elections again.
Exactly. If we ever have that, it's going to take that administration a lot of work to revive the notion of a two-state solution, if that at that point even is something that people talk about anymore.
Exactly.
I mean, I think from kind of, people who are in the know about Palestine would have, most of us would agree that the two-state solution died many, many years ago as something that was actually going to happen ever. But at least it's, in any kind of form that we inherited from Oslo. Of course, there might be new two-state solutions, quote unquote, but the idea that we were somehow moving towards that, even though it would take a long, long time. I mean, that idea, I think no one believed in that except for rhetorical reasons because it suited them. But you're right, it's a huge shift, the fact that they are not even pretending to care anymore. But what I was trying to say before about Gaza is not so much that they're trying to move the goalposts and they're trying to achieve all these things rhetorically, which I think you're totally right. They have some kind of plan with this. Trying to say is if you have, I think we talked about this before, but if you have this kind of plan where you're trying to push, move the goalposts, push the boundaries for what can be said, what can be done, etc., you also, to be clever about it, to be smart about it, you need to be able to achieve some things, or something that is somewhat similar to what you're saying that you're going to achieve.
Yeah.
And I can't see them not just not building a Riviera. I can't see them in any way wanting to actually get involved on the ground in Gaza. I can't see them wanting to do that. And I just mentioned my reasons before, and given that, they might be moving forward on the West Bank, but at some point they will have to go out and say like, okay, no, there's not going to be a Riviera in Gaza. It's just going to be a closed off enclave where people are starving and we're punishing them whenever we feel like it, which of course will be worse and, even than before, but it still will not be anything like what they're saying.
Yep.
The thing that will be like what they're saying, which I would, I could see happening, would be rebuilding settlements in Gaza. But why they would want to do that? That would be so incredibly stupid. I mean, that would be that would be a huge win for the Palestinians, if we can say so, in terms of bogging Israel down in another horrible situation where Israeli soldiers will be dying every week. So yeah, they might want to do that, but I can't see why. That's a really, really bad idea for them.
Yeah, I agree. Just a last comment before we move on. You mentioned like that a lot of people that are in the know have moved away from the notion of a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. But like most progressives, imagine a one-state solution where it's a democratic state where everyone has equal rights. What we're obviously moving towards is just a larger Israel with some Arab minorities who were essentially second-class citizens. Obviously, I know this. I just wanted to make that clear to anyone who's listening, because I feel like there's like a naive idea of like, okay, great, the two-state solution is dead. Trump contributed to that. Now we can move towards the one-state solution. But I'm just reminding our listeners that there is a one-state solution already in place. That's just Israel from the river to the sea. Okay, moving on to
I wanted to say, I mean, just to respond very briefly to that. I mean, of course, Trump is not moving us closer to any kind of reasonable one-state solution, except for an explicitly apartheid situation, where even Israel itself will, they won't call themselves apartheid, but they will be claiming Palestinians as their subjects. What I'm thinking about that, it's not progressive, of course, in itself, and it looks darker or bleaker today than perhaps ever before. But the fact that Israel will be, I mean, this is it almost old statement that, if we want to keep Israel as a Jewish state, we need to get rid of the Palestinians in terms of excluding them from the Israeli state, and giving them some kind of two-state solution so that they're outside our borders, because otherwise the demographics are going to kill us. We will not be the majority in this country, and
Yeah.
then we won't survive in the long run. Okay, it might take 20 years, but in the end, we will have an apartheid a situation of a struggle against apartheid, all out, clear, everyone will see it, and then Israel is doomed. It might take a long time, but then the only way out would be an actual all-out genocide, which would be massive enough to actually change the demographics. I mean, actually a Holocaust. Sure, they might do that as well. We'll never know, but or we might know at some point in the future. But what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say is, like, they are pushing themselves into a situation where eventually they cannot win without actually killing every single Palestinian.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to our last story today. Sam, please update us on Syria and Lebanon. I think this is extremely important because Syria has already sort of left the news, and for good reasons, because there is no longer a large-scale war in that country, which is great. Obviously, there are still sort of clashes and fighting in different pockets of the country. But I think it's extremely important in these situations to keep following up, and keep updating on the political development. So if you would please, take it away.
Yes, you're right. It's what keeps Syria out of the news, I suppose, is the fact that it is surprisingly calm and surprisingly peaceful. No one would expect this. We talked to on the podcast Yassin al-Hajj before several times, and he is. You remember him saying, like, not even those of us who wanted Assad to fall right away under any circumstances were like, we all believed that there were going to be pogroms, people were going to be killed, there were going to be clashes, going on for a long time. We just thought that is a necessary thing. You have to accept that happening as part of dismantling the regime. But what we see now is very little of that. We have, of course, the ongoing question of the Kurdish areas, or the Kurdish controlled, or the Syrian Democratic Forces controlled areas of the eastern, northeastern Syria, where there's been a horrific car bomb about a week ago in Manbij, where everyone's blaming everyone, basically the Turkish-aligned Syrian National Army and the Kurdish Syrian Defense Forces are, blaming each other for this. It's very I've been trying to read up, but I'm actually not sure who seems to be the likely culprit. But there is still ongoing fighting here, and people are dying, obviously. But it's surprisingly, let's say in a very cynical way, surprisingly low key. There's no major, massive military operations. It's more like skirmishes on the borders or the front lines. What is interesting here, of course, in the long run, what will decide the outcome is probably ongoing discussions between Turkey and the US. Trump has drawn up, or the Trump administration has drawn up plans to to leave Syria entirely. And Trump has even said, some of his usual gibberish along the lines of Syria is a mess. They're all messing things up over there. They're messy people. Let's not, we're not going to get into that mess. Something that has to be interpreted as him trying to say, we should just leave it all. But of course, this would need someone else to move in. And the only thing... there would be the central Damascus government moving in, or Turkey taking a huge major role here, and both of those things would probably, or they risk at least leading to an all-out civil war with the Kurdish forces, which would be catastrophic for everyone, for the Kurds, of course, but also for the future of Syria and the Middle East. So let's hope not. And also, of course, 50,000 people are still imprisoned after the wars against Daesh and ISIS, and years back now. 50,000 people are in prison, and most of them have not been charged. They have not been actually sentenced to anything. They're just enemy fighters, enemy combatants, or whatever Bush used to call it. So also those people will need to be kept in prison, says the US. Of course, we don't want a lot of 50,000 jihadis out on the streets, but on the other hand, obviously there's no due process here. There's no structure to any of this. They just want to keep them in prison indefinitely. And for that, either the Syrian state has to step in or Turkey has to step in. So very, very complicated situation. But I think this is just, we're going to have to cover keep covering the question of the Kurdish enclave. What is important here, I think, is it's very much an international question at the moment. What is more confusing to me is the fact that the Western countries, contrary to what we speculated last time, have not lifted the sanctions on Syria. There's still, heavy sanctions in place on Syria. The new government, the Syrian, Syrian society, all of it. We've been covering before also the circulating grand conspiracy theories that the West and especially Israel was behind the Sharia al-Julani. I guess we can dispel those now, at least when they keep, boycotting the new government in Damascus. But this puts them in a really difficult situation. They're trying to rebuild. Whatever you think of them, they're actually seem to be trying to get the economy up and running, but it's very, very difficult as long as they still have these heavy sanctions. Which leads us to the thing that Sharia met with the Russians again, and they have given them some kind of informal loan of a lot of money. It's not really clear how much or how it worked out, but they have loaned them a lot of money to keep the country up and running, basically. Which means that, the current government of Syria just fought an all-out civil war against a regime backed by Russia, which would never have stayed as long as it did, except for Russia. The regime fell, there's a new regime in place, and they are now, moving closer to Russia. So somehow it seems that Russia might actually keep its position in Syria after all. And if so, only because of the fumblings and the fuck-ups of the West, basically. To me, it's mysterious. I can see no reason why they would not just lift the sanctions and move in even with humanitarian support, etc., to try to keep Syria close to the West. But yeah, stuff keeps getting complicated. But yeah, for now, it's somewhat calm in Syria, which is the opposite of what you can say for Lebanon, which has been doing amazingly. They got a new government, they got new people in power, as we mentioned. They got a new government, a new president after I think 12 rounds of trying to elect one and failing. So the new government is up and running, and they seem to be doing okay, but they are involved, of course, in two major conflicts already, which we could have guessed. One is with Hezbollah, which makes sense. Hezbollah is losing its their military fighting capability is diminished but not gone, but they are very much losing their domestic position of power. That is sliding away from them still. So just the other day, we saw, I think it was 3 days ago, we saw massive clashes on the roads leading to the airport in Beirut, which we've been seeing. That is a typical thing that happens when there is an all-out conflict between the government or other factions of the government, let's say, and Hezbollah, because they use the airport, of course, to fly in money and personnel, etc., from Iran. So this is a situation this time around as well. The army, which was kind of defending or securing the airport, were attacked by, or ended up in clashes with, I'm not sure who attacked whom, with Hezbollah supporters over the fact that they had stopped a number of Irani aircraft from landing at the airport. So there's a smuggling situation going on there. Same thing along the border with Lebanon, where Shia groups have been in conflicts with both the Syrian regime army and the Lebanese army over smuggling of arms, supposedly, but it seems credible. But last but not least, what is Israel up to? And I think this is what's really, really worrying at the moment. Both Syria and Lebanon are, going through difficult times internally, but no one seems to be destabilizing them from the outside so far, except for Israel. And this to me is also, it's not a mystery because we see Israel doing this all the time. But the fact that Israel is still refusing to withdraw from the south fully, south of Lebanon, even though the extended deadline for withdrawing their forces from southern Lebanon was today. They're now keeping 5 strategic points within the south, supposedly to defend themselves against terrorists at Fatwa. But given the fact that the Lebanese army, the Lebanese government is, moving quickly and it seems decisively against Hezbollah, this is the only thing that could really, really strengthen Hezbollah today is if Israel actually stays in Lebanon. It will not take a long time before people start questioning the Lebanese army if they're not able to retake the south again, which Hezbollah did. And this will be a very, very... this is basically the only thing that could help Hezbollah out of their conundrum at the moment. So why Israel is doing this, if not to destabilize Syria, not to keep Hezbollah going, not to keep, that kind of internal conflict going, I cannot see that. Yeah.
But
There's a lot.
That was a lot.
crazy world, guys.
You've just been sinking deeper and deeper into your chair.
So no, his screen is frozen. Something's wrong with this camera. No,
Oh no, he's exhausted.
Listen, I want to give an informed opinion on this, but I don't have one. It's there's only so much one can follow every week. But I'd like to thank Sam for the update. These are just things we're gonna have to keep following. Honestly, it's not simple, this quagmire that we're covering, but it's simply a pleasure to speak with you guys about it every week. So thank you, Noura Ad-Din Faris and Sam Kal Samra for these updates. And thank you from us, from Kalam Podcast. We'll see you next week.
See you next week. Hello, bye.